Chapter 8, Lesson 5, Finding a Greatest Common Factor and Factoring Polynomials. So basically what we're going to do in order to learn our factoring chapter is we are doing reverse distributing. And so before we always had a number outside the parentheses and a binomial or a trinomial inside, and we were taking the 4 times x to be 4x and the 4 times 2 to be 8. So now what we're doing is we're going to be given the 4x plus 8, and we're trying to figure out what was the greatest common factor and what was the binomial here. So to do that, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. So first thing we're going to ask ourselves is, what variables do all of the terms have in common? The second thing we're going to say, what is the biggest number that divides into them all evenly? And once we've done that, what we're going to do is reverse distribute and figure out what the original problem was. So in this case, I have 64 minus 40ab. I'm going to ask myself, what do 64 and 40 have in common? They can both be divided by 8. And 64 doesn't have any variables, so they don't have any variables in common. So I know that 8 was what was times to the binomial. And so in order to reverse distribute, I'm going to be dividing each of these terms by 8. So 64 came from 8 times 8. And 40ab came from negative 5ab times 8. On number 2, I asked myself, what do 4d squared and 16 have in common? They have in common 4. So if I take that back out to the front, that would leave me with d squared plus 4. Down here, I have this trinomial. So I asked myself, what do 5, 10, and 25 all have in common? A 5. This one has x cubed, this one has x squared, and this one has an x. So they all have at least one x. This one has y squared, this one has y to the first, and this one does not have a y. So they do not have that in common. So when I divide these all out, I'm going to have 5x as my greatest common factor, and that would leave me with x squared, y squared. This one, 10 divided by 5 is 2. Take away an x would leave me with xy. And 25 divided by 5 is 5, and the x's cancel. On this one, they have in common an 8. They all have at least one p, and they all have at least one r. So that is my greatest common factor. So the 8s will cancel out. Take away a p, leaves me with 1. Take away an r, leaves me with 1. Minus 24 divided by 8 is 3. P's cancel. Take away an r, leaves me with 2. 16 divided by 8 is 2. Take away p, take away an r, and that's all that's left. Once we get to polynomials or four-termed expressions, we're going to factor by using what's called the window method. And so in the window method, we're going to put each of the 4 terms in one of the boxes as shown here. And then what we're going to do is find the greatest common factor of these, find the greatest common factor of these, find the greatest common factor of these, and of these. And that will create our 2 binomials that tells us what was FOILed to get this. So for number 13, I'm going to put x squared plus 4x plus 2x plus 8 and say, okay, what do they have in common here? An x. And what do they have in common here? And I need a symbol, so they have in common positive 2. What do they have in common here? An x. And what do they have in common here? A plus 4. So my 2 binomials that were FOILed were x plus 2 and x plus 4. On number 17 here, I have negative 6mp plus 4m plus 18p minus 12. And I'm leading with this negative 6, so when I go this way, I'm going to have negative 2m in common. When I go this way, I'm going to have plus 6. Leading here is my negative 6 again, so I have negative 6p, and this way is plus 4. So my 2 binomials were 2m plus 6 and negative 6p plus 4. On number 15, I'm going to do 4b squared minus 12b plus 2b minus 6. And so going this way, they have in common 4b. Going this way, they have in common 2. This way is 4b. And this one is negative 6. So looking at all of these, I have 4b and 4b. And when I multiply those, I get 16b squared. So what that tells me is that we didn't catch the first rule, which was what is the greatest common factor. So as I look at these terms, before I put them in my binomials, I'm going to ask myself, what is their greatest common factor? And they all have in common 2. So instead of this one being 4b plus 2, it's going to be 2b plus 1. And this one, instead of 4b plus 6, is going to be 2b minus 3. Now, when I go to solve these equations, I'm going to set each part of the greatest common factor or each set of parentheses equal to 0, and then solve it to find the two separate answers. So far in Algebra 1, we've been doing a lot of linear equations, and linear equations only cross the x-axis one time. So when we solved all of these, we always got x as a number. On these squared quadratics, what we actually have is two places where the x crosses. And so when we solve these, most of the time, they're going to have two separate answers. So this one, I set the greatest common factor, which is x equal to 0. And then I set this binomial equal to 0 also. This one is solved. I don't have to do anything to it. And this one, I need to add 32 to both sides. So that tells me that this quadratic, if I would graph it, crosses at 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 32. So that would be my two places my quadratic crosses. On this one, I'm going to do 2y plus 5 equals 0. Subtract the 5 and divide by 2. Then I'm also going to do y minus 4 equals 0. Add 4. And so the two places where this one is going to cross is at negative 5 halves and at positive 4. On this one, the first thing I need to do is subtract the 15x to both sides because I have to set it equal to 0. Then I take out a greatest common factor of 3x, which leaves me with 6x minus 5. Then set 3x equal to 0 and divide by 3, x equals 0. Set my binomial equal to 0, add 5, and then divide by 6. Mr. Alam's science class launched a toy rocket from ground level with an initial upward velocity of 60 feet per second. The height h of the rocket in feet above the ground after t seconds is modeled by the equation height equals 60 times time minus 16 times squared. How long, so that tells us we're solving for t, was the rocket in the air before it returned to the ground? And so if it's at the ground, its height must be 0. So the greatest common factor between 60 and negative 16 is 4t. So if I divide that out, it'd be 15 minus 4t equal to 0. So I set 4t equal to 0, and I set 15 minus 4t equal to 0. Divide by 4 and get 0. On this one, first I subtract 15, then I divide by negative 4, and I get 3.75 seconds. So think about a rocket. It starts here at 0, it gets shot up, and then it hits the ground. And they're saying that when it hits the ground, it took 3.75 seconds.